I still remember the way he looked at me that night. Not with love. Not even disappointment. Just dismissal. We were sitting at the dinner table, chicken barely warm, my laptop still open beside my plate. I was juggling spreadsheets, customer calls, and leftovers. And then he said it, casually, like it was obvious. "You really think your little admin job is going to matter someday?" He smiled like he'd said something funny. "You're just a glorified secretary, Emily. That's not a career. That's a placeholder." I didn't respond. I just stared at him as something inside me, something buried deep, cracked, and shifted. He didn't know the long nights I spent helping my boss fix client reports. He didn't know the weekends I used to study on the sly, trying to finish community college credits online. He never asked. To him, my ambition was invisible, my effort insignificant. I was his wife, his background noise, his default cheerleader, never his equal. But that night, I realized something. I had allowed myself to be underestimated for so long. I'd forgotten I had power. He finished his wine. "Maybe if you focused less on your emails and more on this marriage, things would be different," he muttered, getting up. The door closed behind him with a click. I didn't cry. I didn't chase him. I opened my laptop again, and I typed Harvard Extension School, admissions. A week after that dinner, I applied, quietly. I didn't mention it to anyone, not even my sister, not my best friend. I needed this decision to belong solely to me. No validation, no applause, just resolve. I squeezed the application in between tasks at work, used my 10-minute breaks to review essay prompts, and stayed up past midnight rewriting personal statements, all while pretending everything was fine at home. He barely noticed. He assumed my silence meant surrender, that I'd absorbed his words and agreed, that I'd stay in my place, grateful for scraps of approval. He had no idea. When the email from Harvard came weeks later, I sat in the parking lot outside CVS, heart pounding, screen trembling in my hand. Accepted. Just one word. But it felt like a door opening in the back of a dark room, letting in air, light, a way out. I didn't scream. I smiled. Then I drove home like nothing had happened. Cooked dinner. Folded laundry. Kissed him on the cheek. He never asked how my day went. Why would he? In his eyes, my life was too small to matter. But something had shifted. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad anymore. I was focused, determined. While he bragged at dinner parties about his firm's new client, I researched course schedules under the table. While he scrolled through golf memes, I studied statistics and wrote papers about behavioral economics. He thought I was quiet lately. What I was becoming unstoppable. The first semester was brutal. I worked full-time, studied at night, and pretended everything was normal at home. My body ran on coffee and adrenaline, my mind on borrowed hope. He never noticed my eyes red from reading academic journals at 3 a.m. He never questioned why I stayed late at the office, or why I suddenly had headphones in at every spare moment. I told him I was just watching TED Talks. He laughed. Self-help junk, he called it. If only he knew it was actually a lecture on neuroeconomics by a tenured Harvard professor. But I kept my head down. That was the plan. Silent rise. No announcements. No victories posted on Facebook. Only momentum. He started staying out later. Drinks with clients. Or so he claimed. I didn't ask. Not because I trusted him, but because I didn't have the energy to care. I wasn't chasing him anymore. I was chasing a future. One where I'd never again have to beg for respect. One where I could walk into any room and know I belonged. Not because someone gave me permission, but because I had earned it. Quietly. Relentlessly. And right around this time, something strange began happening. My coworkers started looking at me differently. They didn't know about Harvard, but they could feel something. A shift. I was sharper, faster, more decisive. My boss invited me to lead meetings. Clients began requesting me by name. And at home, he barely noticed. He was too busy lecturing me about loyalty after I dared question his 6th late night that week. I didn't argue. I just smiled. I had essays to finish. Let him talk. If this story resonates with you, please hit like and subscribe. It helps more people discover these true stories of silent power. A year into the program, I was offered a promotion at work. Project coordinator, better salary, more visibility. It wasn't Harvard yet, but it was a step, and it was mine. I remember coming home, still flushed from the meeting, the offer letter printed and folded in my bag. I told him at dinner. His fork paused midair. "Wait, you got promoted?" I nodded. "Wow," he muttered before returning to his food. No congratulations, no questions, not even a smirk, just silence. I guess it was hard to celebrate a woman he once called replaceable, especially when she was rising without his help. I realized something then. He didn't hate my ambition. He feared it. Because if I rose too high, I might see just how far he'd fallen. I might stop needing him altogether. And that's exactly what was happening. Slowly, the woman he'd dismissed, talked over, belittled, was outgrowing him, quietly, completely. I stopped asking for his opinion. I stopped waiting for his approval. I started building a life he wasn't part of. Not emotionally, not intellectually, not spiritually. I'd smile at his jokes, listen to his golf stories. But inside, I was elsewhere. In Harvard forums, in late-night lectures, in a future that no longer included him. Still, I played the role, I made the bed, laughed at dinner parties, took pictures for his Instagram, let him pretend we were still the perfect couple. But in truth, I was already gone. The divorce hadn't started yet, but my exit had, quiet, steady, unstoppable. It was a Thursday, rain outside, soft, rhythmic. I had just submitted a paper for my behavioral finance course, the hardest assignment yet, and I was proud. Not just of the grade, which hadn't come yet, but of the work, the discipline, the grit. I poured myself a glass of red wine and exhaled for the first time that week. That's when he walked in, wet shoes, undone tie, and that look, the one that always meant he was about to complain. "You forgot to pick up my suit," he snapped, tossing his keys on the counter. "I had a meeting today, Emily." I looked at him. Really looked. A grown man who never once asked if I was okay, who treated me like a personal assistant with a wedding ring. For years, I would have apologized. I would have dropped everything, run to the dry cleaner, made it up to him with dinner and a smile. But this time, I didn't flinch. I just said, I was busy. He scoffed. "Doing what? Reading your little articles again?" He said it with a sneer, like learning was a weakness, like growth was a hobby for women who forgot their place. I looked at him calmly. I had class. That shut him up. He stared at me like I'd spoken in another language. "Class?" he repeated. "Since when are you in school?" I didn't answer. I didn't owe him that anymore. I just took another sip of wine and turned back to my screen. That night, he slept on the couch. I didn't beg. I didn't explain. I just kept reading. That was the night I stopped apologizing for who I was becoming. His birthday came in April. I planned nothing. No dinner reservations, no custom cake, no surprise party like the year before. He noticed. Of course, he did. "You forgot," he said, arms crossed in the doorway. I didn't. I just didn't care the same way. Not because I was cruel, but because I was tired. Tired of celebrating a man who never clapped for me, I had class that night, a group project, a deadline, and I chose it. Over him. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. There was no marriage left to protect, no partnership to nurture, just performance. And I was done acting. That night, when I got home, he was drunk. Half a bottle of whiskey gone. He started yelling, calling me selfish, cold, ungrateful. You used to care, he slurred. You used to show up. I stood at the doorway, soaked from the rain, my backpack still on. I used to matter, I said softly. You just never noticed. He didn't have a response, only silence. For once, he didn't have the final word. I walked past him, took a shower, dried my notes, and started prepping for finals. The man downstairs had become noise. Background. The marriage, once a home, now felt like a waiting room. And my turn to leave was coming. I could feel it. In the quiet confidence I wore now like armor. In the way I no longer flinched when he raised his voice. In the way I whispered to myself in the mirror, almost there. It was a Sunday morning. Quiet. Almost peaceful. I had just finished an essay on systemic bias in corporate hiring when I came downstairs to find him sitting at the kitchen table, suit on, hair combed, like he was about to deliver a business pitch. Only this time, the proposal wasn't for a client. It was for our end. He slid a manila envelope across the table. I think we both know this isn't working, he said flatly. I stared at the envelope. Clean edges, final lines. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. Instead, I placed my mug down and nodded. Okay. He seemed surprised. Maybe even disappointed that I didn't beg, didn't plead for a second chance. I think he wanted a fight. Something to make him feel like the powerful one. But I had no fight left, at least not for him. My war had been quiet, internal, fought through textbooks, tears, and late-night discussions with professors who saw me, and I had already won. He stood there awkwardly, unsure of what to say. So, you agree? I looked up at him, calm. I already left. Daniel, you're just catching up. I signed the papers that evening. No drama, no theatrics. Just the quiet sound of a pen freeing a woman. Then I submitted my final project and got an A. The divorce wasn't an end. It was confirmation. That I had been right to bet on myself when no one else did. That I had always been more than someone's wife. And while he moved out with boxes, I stayed behind. In the house I'd worked for. Built a future in. And finally felt free inside. A month after the papers were filed, I got the official acceptance into the capstone phase. It was the final stretch. The part that would stamp Harvard graduate next to my name. In bold, in ink, in history. I stared at the email for a long time. Not because I doubted I'd earned it, but because this time, I had no one to share it with. No one who'd clap in the kitchen. No partner waiting with champagne. Just me, my coffee, and the knowledge that I'd done something extraordinary without applause. And somehow, that made it more sacred. My classmates didn't know my backstory. They saw me as smart, reliable, efficient, a leader in our group projects. They had no idea I studied while heating up leftover rice, or cried in the bathroom between work meetings. They didn't know I had been called nothing. And I didn't tell them, because that wasn't my name anymore. Graduation was set for spring. I ordered my robe, booked my ticket to Cambridge, and then I did something bold. I invited him, not because I wanted him there, but because I wanted him to know, to feel it, to sit in that folding chair and hear my name called from that stage, the same name he once dismissed as invisible. The RSVP came back blank, of course. But that silence, too, was a kind of music. I didn't need him in the audience. I never had. Just 2 weeks before graduation, I received an unexpected email. Subject line, Charity Gala Invitation, Daniel Carter Foundation. I blinked. Daniel Carter, my ex-husband. Apparently, he had launched a nonprofit for underserved youth. Or so it claimed. I laughed. The man who once mocked my community college classes was now posing as a champion for education. The irony was rich. But what caught my eye wasn't the event itself. It was the list of honorees. One name stood out. Mine, Emily Carter, for her dedication to educational equity and women's empowerment. My breath caught. He had used my name, my achievements, my work, as a badge of honor for his public image. And worse, he hadn't even asked. I stared at the email, unsure whether to laugh, scream, or show up in a red dress. So, I chose the latter. I RSVP'd yes. When the night came, I walked into that ballroom like I owned it, because in a way, I did. The applause that greeted me wasn't his doing. It was the echo of every paper I wrote, every night I cried but kept going, every insult I swallowed and turned into fuel. He stood by the stage, speech in hand, smile rehearsed. But the room saw me. The Harvard grad, the woman he'd underestimated, the woman he'd lost. The lights dimmed. He stepped up to the mic. Tonight, we celebrate those who believe in second chances, he began, voice polished, tone calculated. I stood near the back, unnoticed, arms folded. He talked about the foundation, about helping women find their voice, their path, their power, words he never used when I needed them most. Then he said it. One of tonight's honorees taught me that resilience isn't loud. It's silent. It's invisible, until it becomes undeniable. He gestured to the screen. My face appeared, my credentials, my Harvard graduation announcement. The room applauded. Cameras flashed. But all I could think was, you didn't write that. You didn't live that. He had taken my story and trimmed it down to a paragraph that served him. No mention of the insults, the erasure, the years he called me small. Just the success, now convenient, now public, now his to showcase. When they called me on stage, I didn't hesitate. I smiled, took the mic, and then I paused, letting the room settle, letting him feel the weight of what I was about to say. I wasn't going to speak tonight, I began. But standing here, I realize I must. Because stories matter, and the truth matters. He shifted uncomfortably behind me. This success, it wasn't nurtured. It was built, quietly, alone, while being told I was nothing. And if tonight proves anything, it's that silence doesn't mean weakness. It means preparation. A hush swept the room. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I had said what mattered. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Emails, mentions, DMs from women I didn't even know. Your speech made me cry. Thank you for saying what so many of us couldn't. You gave me permission to try again. I wasn't a celebrity. I wasn't trying to go viral. But somehow, that 3-minute speech about silent strength became a ripple, and then a wave. Articles were written. One headline read, "From dismissed wife to Harvard grad, Emily Carter's quiet revolution." Another, "She stood up without raising her voice." And in the middle of all that noise, Daniel went quiet. His PR team issued a vague statement about respecting all voices. He canceled 2 interviews. I suppose it's hard to spin a narrative when the truth is already echoing louder than your version of events. But I wasn't angry, not anymore. Pity crept in. Maybe because while I had grown, healed, and stood on my own, he was still pretending. Still building reputations out of borrowed stories, still seeking applause for work he never did. I went for a walk that afternoon. No makeup, hoodie on, headphones in. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about rest. I had spent years climbing a silent mountain, And now I was standing at the summit. And the view, it wasn't loud. It wasn't crowded. It was peaceful. And mine. The day of graduation came like a quiet sunrise. No drama, no rush, just a deep, steady breath. I stood in front of the mirror in my cap and gown, fingers brushing the Harvard crest stitched at the collar. It wasn't just fabric, it was proof. Of every night I chose not to give up. Of every insult I turned into fuel. Of every silent moment I used to rebuild myself in the dark. When I walked across that stage, the applause felt distant. Not because it wasn't real, but because I was hearing something else. The echo of every time he said I'd never matter. Every, "You're wasting your time." Every, "It's just a phase." They played like ghosts in reverse, fading as I stepped forward, evaporating as I took the diploma in my hand. I glanced at the crowd. My sister was there. A few colleagues. My old professor, cheering wildly with a "That's my girl" sign. But not him, not Daniel. And that absence, it didn't sting. It liberated, because I realized something. His approval had never been the prize. The real victory was that I no longer needed it. When the ceremony ended, I stood beneath the ivy-covered archways of the campus. Someone asked if I had plans to celebrate. I smiled. I already did. And I meant it. Because this walk in silence, this rise without spotlight, was the celebration. A quiet woman, once called nothing, now walking with everything. A week after graduation, a letter arrived, handwritten, no return address. But I recognized the handwriting, Daniel's. My stomach didn't twist the way it used to. I was too far gone for that. Still, I opened it. 3 pages. No grand apology. No begging for forgiveness. Just fragments. I didn't know what I was doing. You didn't deserve what I said. I used your story because I didn't have one of my own. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't repair. It was recognition. The kind that always comes too late. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to say. His words no longer had a home in me. No place to land. I had outgrown the part of me that needed closure from him. He was finally realizing what I had known since the night he called me just a secretary, that his vision had always been small, and mine, quietly, had always been infinite. That same day, I received another message, this one from a women's leadership conference in Chicago. They wanted me to speak, to tell my story. Not the version he borrowed, but the real one. The quiet one. The one that rose from silence and turned brokenness into power. I looked at the mirror. Harvard grad, survivor of invisible wars, architect of my own name. I smiled. Yes, I whispered. I'll be there. The conference stage was nothing like I imagined. No dramatic lights, no roaring crowd, just a quiet room filled with thoughtful eyes. Mostly women, some taking notes, others simply holding space. As I stepped up, I remembered the girl I used to be, shrinking into corners, second-guessing her voice, waiting for someone to say you're enough. Now I stood with a mic in hand, not to prove, not to fight, but to tell the truth. I opened with the sentence that had once broken me. He called my job nothing. There was a collective stillness. No gasps, just nods, recognition. And then I told them about the nights I studied beside cold dinners, the emails sent between heartbreaks, the decision to rise in silence while the world told me to stay small. I told them how it felt to walk across that Harvard stage carrying the weight of 1,000 doubts, none of which belonged to me anymore. I ended with this. You don't need a spotlight to rise. You need a reason. And sometimes, being underestimated is the best one you'll ever get. The room stood. Applause washed over me, not like fireworks, more like rain after a long drought. Cleansing, real. Afterward, a woman approached me, tears in her eyes. "I left my husband last month," she whispered. "Your story felt like mine, but with an ending I didn't know was possible." I held her hand. "It is," I said. "It begins in the quiet." Months later, on an ordinary Thursday, I walked past the office building where Daniel once worked. I paused for a moment, not out of nostalgia, just curiosity. The nameplate had changed. His company had merged or folded. I wasn't sure. I didn't keep up. The man who once defined my worth by job titles and salary brackets no longer occupied any space in my world, not even in memory. Not really. I crossed the street, a coffee in one hand, a manuscript draft in the other. I was working on a book now, not about revenge, but rebirth. About what happens when you refuse to disappear, even when you're made to feel invisible. Because I never vanished. I transformed. I used the silence they gave me as space to grow. I turned dismissal into direction, pain into precision, and now everything I had, the peace, the power, the presence, was mine, earned, unborrowed. That night, I sat at my desk, laptop open, pages filled with the voice I once hid. I added the final sentence of chapter 10. Sometimes the greatest revenge is becoming everything they said you'd never be, without ever raising your voice. I clicked save and smiled. Not because I had won, but because I had arrived. Thank you for watching until the end. If you've ever lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the loudest impact is made in silence.